Now wait, I'm not being satirical. I do think that Pope Francis has done some very amazing things in terms of waking people up to the crisis in the Catholic Church. I don't know that the Catholic Church, at least in her human element, could have withstood another conservative pope who's very pro-life and pro-family, but sort of allowed the secularization of the state to go on without any Catholic influence to speak of, and allowed the modernization of the Catholic Church to just continue to take its course and run roughshod over what's left of the Catholic world, the Catholic Church, the Catholic liturgy, Catholic morality, and so forth. So in that sense, I think Pope Francis has done a service for the Church and for all of us that no one could ever have expected. I mean, people are calling Pope Francis now a wrecking ball. He has just seems to have set himself on a path that has to do with the eradication of the Catholic Church as we knew it, what was left of it anyway, in the wake of the Second Vatican Council. In these two pontificates, with Pope Benedict having done so many good things to restore tradition, to open people's eyes to the importance of the only way out of this crisis is to turn back toward the past, to restore Catholic tradition, to restore Catholic identity. Pope Benedict accomplished a great deal in that direction. And now Pope Francis, who's nothing like Pope Benedict, I think has succeeded in removing the rest of the blindfold. I mean, there are not a lot of people out there who are not radical leftists who are still defending Pope Francis. Now, there are some bloggers, there are some internet TV personalities such as Michael Voris or Mark Shea, friends of ours from the past, who are still holding on to this defense of Pope Francis. I don't think they will be in 6 months. That's my prediction for 2015. This defense of the indefensible things that Pope Francis is doing, I think is going to fall by the wayside, and I predict a coming together of conservative and traditional Catholics very, very soon in the future. It's already happening. The remnant is bursting at the seams right now because people are they're afraid. They're afraid. They're traumatized by what's happening. They're no longer interested in the neo-Catholic game, and that's a great victory for us. That's a great victory for the Church. It's a great victory for Christ the King. It's a great victory for souls, and Pope Francis is responsible for that. So when I say that in our book he could be considered the man of the year as far as the Remnant's concerned, yes, there's nothing we could have done at the Remnant to wake up so many thousands of people, not only to the crisis that's happening right now in the Church, but to the crisis of Vatican II, to the crisis of the new Mass, to the crisis of the new ecclesiology, of the new ecumenism, the new evangelization. Those were things it was very difficult to make sincere and good Catholics understand what the problem was. They understood what was wrong with communion in the hand and altar girls and so forth, although many of them went along with that as well, believing that since the post-conciliar popes had approved these things, they were obligated to accept them. This is not the case. The Church, as we've said for so long, the Church has been infiltrated, and that infiltration is now being made manifest by Pope Francis. And Pope Francis is, in my opinion, the Pope. I call on all of our subscribers, supporters, friends, allies around the world to pray for Pope Francis, because for 30, 40 years, we at the Remnant have been talking about the diabolical disorientation. We've been talking about the fact that the powers of darkness really have made startling progress in undermining the Catholic Church from the pew all the way to St. Peter's. That's just where we are. And so we need to pray for Pope Francis. He is the Pope. He absolutely is the Pope. And it's very important for us to realize that while he is the Pope, while we need to pray for him, he is the worst Pope in history, in my opinion. And out of this damage that he's causing all around the world, we're beginning now to see the rebirth again of traditional Catholicism. People looking at this and saying, this isn't Catholic, this isn't the way it should be. And with respect to our friends, like the two gentlemen who I mentioned earlier, we have Pope Francis now many times on the record calling for debate, calling for criticisms of his new orientation, his new outlook on the papacy and on the Church. So I would turn this around and say that far from it being disobedient or disloyal to criticize Pope Francis, since he is asking us to do so, to enter into this dialogue, since he is thanking his critics, such as Paul Morrow and others, it almost becomes a point of obedience to obey the Holy Father and to be critical of this new approach that he's taking. It's almost incumbent upon us as Catholics to obey him and to enter into this dialogue and say, Holy Father, we don't get it, we don't like it, we disagree, and here's why, publicly, so that this debate, this discussion that the Holy Father has called for can go on robustly. I think it's really very important right now for that to happen. Over Christmas, right after Christmas, one of these crazy trailer trash women, topless women from the organization, Femen, they don't, these poor girls, they don't even know what they're doing. They're paid to take their clothes off and run around and hold up protest signs. They don't know what the issues are, of course. The organizers do, but the girls that we see, in the media don't. And so one of these girls jumped through the barricade in St. Peter's and stole the infant out of the creche at St. Peter's. Now, a couple of things came to mind there. Number one, Pope Francis, maybe you want to beef up security instead of firing and getting rid of the Swiss Guard, which is one of the few institutions in the Vatican that has retained tradition and still does a great job at what they're called to do in service of the church. Obviously, we need more of them because this woman, who's topless, jumps through, grabs the baby out of the creche, threatens to destroy it. She gets covered up by a guard, and away she goes. And we don't even, at the Remnant, we don't even cover these crazy trailer trash ladies anymore. I mean, they're whores for publicity and whores for other things too, no doubt. And we don't cover it. They want attention. As soon as the cameras come out, that's when they do their thing. So our little part at the Remnant is to simply ignore them. But it occurred to me, who behaves like this on the world stage? What other religion has crazed, spent pieces of used jet trash, taking off their clothes, making a spectacle, and trying to rush in and destroy the holy holiday, the holy celebration, the holy rituals of a given religion? What other religion has this problem? Why do these people, why do these insane leftists, why do they hate the baby? This organization, Femen, actually called for the kidnapping of the baby Jesus statues out of creches around the whole world this Christmas. I don't know. I find that somewhat comforting. These evil people are so terrified by the plaster image of Jesus Christ that they're at war against that. Consider the hatred, the universal hatred against the baby Jesus. It's a faith strengthener. It really, really is. They have not won. They think we believe they've won probably more than they do, because you can see in the antics of organizations like Femen that they're not at all convinced that Christianity is gone, and we shouldn't be either. We shouldn't give up the fight. And so as 2015 dawns now, and there's a lot of uncertainty in politics and in religion, let us look at the hate that our enemies are showing toward our children, towards our schools, towards our churches, towards our religion, toward our God, and look at that hate and realize that in there is a sign of the coming victory of Jesus Christ our King, that we will not lose, that ultimately he will be victorious. They know it, and the question is, do we still know it? Our guest tonight could not be with us in studio or by Skype, but he was kind enough to come and have a little chat. We had so much fun that we probably didn't speak to Judge Andrew Napolitano about his new book as much as I would have liked. The book is Suicide Pact, and I highly recommend it. The subtitle is The Radical Expansion of Presidential Powers and the Lethal Threat to American Liberty, again by Judge Andrew P. Napolitano, with a foreword by Senator Rand Paul. Judge Napolitano is just a great guy. He's a solid Catholic. I'm sure we could find some things that we disagree with, but overall, as you'll see in the following audio interview that I conducted with the judge last week, there's an awful lot that we agree with this man on, and I really would encourage traditional Catholics all around the world to appreciate the importance of having a man of this caliber still out there in the mainstream media. He's on Fox News quite often, and you'll see in the course of the discussion that in Judge Napolitano, we have a man who's well worth supporting. We have a fellow traveler, a kindred spirit, an ally, and a soldier of Jesus Christ who's doing great work.
Hello, sir.
Michael, Matt, how are you, my dear friend?
Just fine. How are you doing?
My goodness, I have longed to meet you. I wish we could meet in person.
Well, that's great to hear. You've made my day, sir. Most people that I know are very aware of your work and very proud to see you on the Fox News channel, with some frequency. But I wonder, for those who may not be aware, if you could just tell us something about your motivation for writing Suicide Pact. Just give us an idea.
Well, when I first wrote my first book, let me first say, Michael, it's a pleasure to be on with you and a pleasure to be affiliated with you. We share the same values, and I probably would embrace just about everybody listening to us now if that were physically possible because of my enthusiasm for the joy that we share and the values that we share. I thought when I wrote my first book on the Constitution that would be it. This is my ninth, because my job at Fox and even in my teaching at Brooklyn Law School is to watch the government as it steals liberty, seizes property, and interferes with economic opportunity. And the government keeps me busy because it does so much of that. This particular book has been something that's been in the back of my mind for a while because it focuses on the very narrow area of presidential overreach. I have long thought that the presidency, the modern-day presidency, is nothing like what the framers thought they were giving us, and it is in periods of wartime that the presidency has stolen liberty from individuals and even stolen constitutional powers from the courts and the Congress, and the courts and the Congress have typically let it go. So Abraham Lincoln, of course, notoriously suspended the writ of habeas corpus, killed innocent Americans, locked people up because of their political opinions. Woodrow Wilson locked people up because they spoke German in public and recited the Declaration of Independence in front of draft offices. And FDR locked people up because they wouldn't give him their gold so he could pay for it at $25 an ounce and sell it for $35 an ounce. And these things go on and on and on. The lesson of the book is that each president uses the uncorrected, unpunished excesses of his predecessors to justify his own inappropriate behavior. So as much as I'm critical of Barack Obama, he has a lot more material to play on. I mean, one could never have imagined that a president would claim he can kill Americans because he thinks they're bad people, and due process is inconvenient, and his deliberate, secret decision to kill them is an adequate constitutional substitute for due process. That's an argument that could be made by almost any dictator, and is anathema in a constitutional republic. So by being critical of virtually all presidents, I hope the book has some apolitical credibility. I believe that I'm consistent in my devotion to constitutional liberty, to the natural law, to the primacy of the individual, and to belief that a president should be modest and humble and faithful to the laws, and not trying to claim a legacy by being lawless.
Yeah, I remember when, I think it was Joe Sobran who said that the Constitution pretty much died at the Civil War. And that's one thing that struck me about your book, is you seem to be going back into history and tracing this, as opposed to something I think there's a lot of reader and viewer fatigue, which is that it's all partisan. If we can just get the GOP, everything's going to be fine. And your book seems to go well beyond that, and this is a bipartisan threat having to do with the overreaching presidential powers for some time now, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, many of the complaints that the Republicans in the Congress have about Barack Obama is his exercise of powers that they themselves gave to George W. Bush. And many of the...
I asked you about that, but I thought I might get you in trouble with your...
No, my bosses are used to me by now on that. And many of the disputes between the two parties, in my view, are cosmetic. I mean, there are some transcendental issues. I see 4 of them, and the parties are of one mind on that. The first is the right to life. And neither party lifts a finger on abortion. I mean, when the Republicans controlled the Congress and George Bush was in the White House, all they had to do was enact a one-sentence piece of legislation: the fetus in the womb is a person for all legal and constitutional purposes. That would have ended abortions in the stroke of a pen. But of course, nobody did that. The legislation was proposed, but no one was permitted to vote on it. So they're of one mind on that. They're of one mind on whether our rights are natural to us, as Jefferson argued in the Declaration of Independence. Both parties believe that our rights come from the government,
right,
and that they can open up the spigot in good times and turn down the spigot in bad times. And both parties favor perpetual debt and perpetual war. Those are the most important issues on the planet today: life, natural rights, war, and debt. And the parties are exactly of one mind on them. It doesn't matter who's elected. I mean, if the Republicans continue to compromise away what they claim they believe in, it won't matter if Chris Christie is elected president or Scott Walker or Hillary Clinton, because they'll all do the same thing.
Same exact thing. Now, is there a game going on? Because I remember, even back since the days of Ronald Reagan, where it just seemed to me to be so odd that all of the first ladies were pro-choice and the conservative Republican presidents were pro-life. And it just doesn't seem to resonate with what we know about, happily married people, that you could be divided on something so fundamental as whether a baby should be killed in his mother's womb or not, So is that a game? Does the political game go to that extent?
Well, I hate to burst the bubble, but Ronald Reagan signed the most liberal abortion law in the country pre-Roe versus Wade when he was the governor of California, and George H.W. Bush was pro-abortion his entire life until he agreed to join Reagan's ticket. I don't even know how serious these people are to the issue of life. I think they portray themselves as serious because they all need the votes of Catholics and Protestant fundamentalists in the Republican primaries, but once they get into office, they do nothing. I shouldn't say absolutely nothing. I mean, Reagan put Justice Scalia on the court, but of course he also gave us O'Connor, who authored what is the currently prevailing Supreme Court opinion on the right to kill babies in their mothers' wombs. But Bush is particularly, George W. now, not H.W., offensive because of the 6 years that he enjoyed huge majorities in both parties, and with respect to the protection of innocent life, did absolutely nothing.
It isn't that ironic, because there were so many good people who went along with the invasion of Iraq precisely because the president at the time was pro-life, supposedly. It's like that seems to cancel everything out. So we really kind of lost our heads about just war for a time because of the issue of life, and it's unfortunate, right?
It's profoundly unfortunate, and it has ramifications even today. I mean, the reason that Al-Qaeda is in the Arabian Peninsula and these ISIS people are cutting off the heads of innocent, in one case, profoundly Catholic journalists is because of our efforts to try and tell people in the Middle East how to live. Right. Because we invade their countries and force them to accept democracy. These are people utterly unprepared for it. I mean, democracy is not just majority rule. Democracy is respect for the natural rights of human beings. And the mentality of the people on whom we have attempted to foist the George Bush version or the Dick Cheney version of democracy is utterly unprepared and unwilling to accept that.
And it's just not working.
No, it's profoundly not working. And of course, this perpetual war and perpetual debt, reinforce each other. Bush paid for the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan on a credit card. I don't think he would have been reelected, or his Republican base in the Congress would have been reelected if he had paid for it by higher taxes. So they basically have passed it on to generations as yet unborn. I'll give you a startling example. I think the least just, least useful war that we participated in the past 100 years was World War I. Woodrow Wilson borrowed $30 billion, a small amount of money by today's standards, to finance World War I. We are still paying interest on that debt and on that principle in a useless, fruitless war that is 97 years old. There isn't a human being living that was alive and fought in that war, and we're still paying the debt. Oh, we rolled over the principal, but we still owe the principal to different people from those from whom we borrowed it, and we paid over $15 billion in interest charges on the $30 billion we borrowed. That's the way the government operates.
But look at all the great things that came about as a result of World War I, Judge. Come on, huh?
Right. Oh, boy.
Sure.
Sorry if I'm getting carried away here a little bit, but it infuriates me. You know, my book right before this is called Theodore and Woodrow: How Two American Presidents Destroyed Constitutional Freedom. And of course, if you're a Princeton alumnus, as I am, and you're going to criticize Woodrow Wilson in print, as obviously I did in this book, you are anathema to the point where they won't even accept a paid ad in the Princeton Alumni Weekly for the book.
Your own alma mater. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Well, let me steer you back just a little bit. This is so much fun. I'm getting carried away too. But can you tell, with respect to your new book now, Suicide Pact, can you tell me what is the proper understanding or relationship that should exist between rights or civil liberties versus our security?
I have often argued many times that when people say it is the job of the government to balance liberty versus security, that is absolutely the wrong word. The right word is bias, not balance. Liberty and security are not equals. Liberty is a natural right that comes from our humanity. It's as natural to us as our lungs and our fingertips. Safety is a good that you go out and purchase. Now, you cannot possibly equate in the hierarchical order of God's gifts and man's creations the gift of liberty, which is the one aspect we share in common with God the Father, who made us in his image and likeness, perfect freedom, freedom to do good and freedom to do ill. You cannot equate that with a good, like membership in a gym or health insurance or safety. So liberty is the default position. Every conceivable benefit of every doubt must be given to liberty when it interferes with security. So that's my observation of liberty versus security. The other observation I would make is that because liberty is natural to us, the government can't take it away by majority vote. I mean, it would be no more right for all the world but one to silence the one than it would be for the one, had he the power, to silence the rest of the world, because freedom of speech is a natural right. It can only be given up by individuals. It can't be taken by legislative action or majority vote. I don't need the government's permission or my neighbor's permission to speak my mind. Now, if I rob a bank, I have stolen somebody's property. I have violated their natural rights, and in doing so, have given up my claim to my natural rights. So I can be put in a jail, and my freedom of movement and my freedom of expression can be limited. But I can only do that to myself. I don't give up the natural rights of the depositors in the bank or the owners of the bank by robbing it. I give up only my own. So when the Congress enacts legislation, like the Alien and Sedition Acts, which prohibited criticism of the government, or the Patriot Act, which lets federal agents write their own search warrants, or the Intelligence Authorization Act of 2015, which was just signed into law earlier this week, which permits the NSA to share information that it gathers from unlawful spying with law enforcement. When the government does that, it is tipping its hand that it is rejecting the Jeffersonian idea that our rights are inalienable and comes from God, and accepting the positivist view that our rights come from the government, and the law is what the government says it is, and the natural law can be trampled even by the government. And both parties agree with that.
Right. So what do you do with the fact, I know you argue in your book that these rights, many of these rights are God-given, and when we live in a nation now that's becoming increasingly God-phobic, if that's a word, how do you defend that idea? Because it does seem like the state is used. Well,
you have to embarrass public officials into revealing or acknowledging what they truly are by challenging them. Do you realize what you voted for? Do you realize the consequences of this? Do you realize this was voted on without you reading it? Do you realize this was voted on without you debating it? I think that most human beings are scandalized when they recognize what laws the government has enacted. The other thing we have to do is to elect people to the government who share these views. Now, I know of like 1.5 of people whose names are mentioned for the presidential nomination. Rand Paul, in my view, though not Catholic, shares about 95% of the views that you and I and the people now listening to us share. I think that Ted Cruz probably shares about 55 or 60% of our views. Short of that, the rest of them are all the same. It doesn't matter what party they're in. But if Rand Paul were to be president, presumably there'd be people who think the way he does in the Congress, and he would put people who think the way he does on the courts, and that might begin to turn things around. But short of that, the march toward authoritarianism and ultimately revolution, hopefully bloodless, will continue unabated. I mean, it moves in great strides under the presidency of Barack Obama, even as we speak. He's rewriting the laws involving Cuba and immigration and whatever he thinks will give him a legacy.
And thanking Pope Francis all the way along for supposedly being his ally. Let me ask you this about because one of the conservative tenets, or one of the things that people are relying on to possibly form some sort of an alternative, is this idea of states' rights. But doesn't it seem like, given the power now of federal public education, where they basically are becoming indoctrination camps for the federal message, or the government's message, does that still hold water in your opinion? The idea of leaving some of these moral and social decisions up to the states, when you do begin to see a sort of unanimity in thinking?
Well, I do believe that the government closest to the people is a better form of government, but the states are, and here's where I sometimes get into fights with my fellow small government folks. The states can be just as tyrannical as the federal government. I mean, slavery in this country was instituted by the states, not by the federal government. The feds protected it and had the Fugitive Slave Act, but slavery was essentially authorized and administered and enforced by state governments. I mean, this is the reason that I preach and explain the natural law, because the natural law is a restraint on all governments. Having said that, I think that if the 16th and 17th Amendments were to be repealed, if the federal government could not tap our incomes, and if senators were sent to the Senate as representatives of states as states, not as representatives of the people in the states, that the federal government would shrink down into the confines of the Constitution, and that would be a better thing than we have now. Then, of course, you would have, instead of one tyrannical government, one big tyrannical government, you'd have 50 small tyrannical governments, and that, of course, is where the natural law comes in. I mean, fidelity to the natural law is the answer to virtually all of our woes, because it recognizes the order of things, the area of human behavior, for the exercise of which we do not need a permission slip from the government, nor will we tolerate surveillance from the government. The natural law, as articulated by St. Thomas Aquinas and refined over the centuries, is the most intellectually acceptable, effective restraint on the government that there is.
Is that, in your opinion, as a Catholic, is that pretty much code for accepting and proclaiming the kingship of Christ? Then, to defend in a system like we have in America, defending the natural law really is pretty much defending the kingship of Christ.
Well, the natural law leads you to that. I obviously believe in a separation of church and state. But a true embrace of the natural law can only lead you to one place, which is the kingship of Jesus Christ. And I don't expect that to happen under this papacy, but let's really not get into that.
Do you care to say anything about this papacy?
Oh my goodness! I pray that when he dies, he goes right to heaven. But just don't ask me if there's a time element to my prayer.
Say no
Michael,
more.
it's a delight to speak with you. We must do this on a regular basis.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, I hope we can. That's great fun. And keep up your great work. You have no idea
thank you.
how encouraging it is for us to see you on Fox and elsewhere.
Thank you. And keep the remnant coming. It is truly the work of God. All the best, Michael. Thank you.
I will. Thank you so much, Judge. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.